Welcome to What Lies Beyond with your host, Matt Coburn. Conversations on consciousness science, the paranormal, and the post-material future. This podcast accompanies the What Lies Beyond book by Matt Coburn, now available for purchase on Amazon and other retail outlets. Visit us and subscribe on whatliesbeyond.substack.com. Today, my guest is Jem Bendell. Before the summer of 2023, Jem was a full professor of sustainability leadership and founder of the Initiative for Leadership and Sustainability at the University of Cumbria, UK. He was also the founder of the Deep Adaptation Forum and the co-founder of the International Scholars' Warning on Societal Disruption and Collapse. A major transformation in his career began in 2017 as he took a year out to study the latest climate science and released the Deep Adaptation paper, which went viral. After the release of his book Breaking Together in May 2023, Jem decided to leave employment as a full professor in the UK. Jem then entered a new phase of his life, where the development of the Bekandze regenerative farm school in Bali and playing devotional music for groups became his main focus. He still writes and lectures on collapse readiness and response. Jem begins today's discussion with an outline of the main thesis of Breaking Together, that societies globally have already begun to experience climate breakdown-driven collapse. This gives a context for our main discussion of free will in nature. We look at the claims by some biologists and neuroscientists that free will is an illusion. Jem suggests reasons to doubt this verdict and why free will might in fact exist throughout the natural world. We discuss Buddhist and Vedantic ideas about consciousness. And Jem explains why it's crucial to admit the limitations of our knowledge in the face of the ultimate questions about life and death. Jem, welcome aboard.
Yeah, well, thanks. Oh, we're going to be setting sail for somewhere interesting in this conversation, are we?
I hope so. So
Okay.
in 2023, you published a book called Breaking Together, and there's a chapter in Breaking Together on free will. But before we zoom in on the free will issue, can I ask about what the broader context of that book actually is? Because I think it would help make sense of why we need to discuss things like free will, free agency in the context of humans, but also in the context of the natural world.
Yeah. So for context, I was always sort of a part-time scholar, even though I was an environmentalist working in NGOs and then in business and then in the UN. But I was also always doing some research and analysis. And then I went full-time as an academic in 2012 in the sustainability field. And I'd had it, to be honest, with just spending my life reading and writing on my own. It's a solitary activity. And I had reached conclusions that society was breaking down. And because of biophysical factors as much as anything else, so climate change, biodiversity loss, amongst other things. So spending your life on a laptop with that awareness didn't make sense to me. But in, when was it? Early 2021, I was frustrated that talking about societal collapse was still kind of seen as marginal, as kind of out there, as unevidenced, unscientific. You had so many people very confidently top of their game, top of the career in climate science, poo-pooing my work and the work of other people, saying similar things. And I thought, I can't walk away from this. This is ridiculous. I do need to research various different aspects of sustainability and society and really check, well, how bad is it? I really wanted to go back into the science and the data again. So yeah, for 18 months with a team of researchers in different fields, explored different aspects of societies and how they might be breaking down. And then I spent 9 months writing the book Breaking Together, subtitled A Freedom-Loving Response to Collapse. And so the motivation was a selfish one, is that I wanted to feel like I put it all together in one book, and therefore I could just head off into the sunset and enjoy myself. That was the story I told myself for 2.5 years, as I had no real life while I was working so hard on this book. That would be it. Then I could have fun. I live my life according to my understanding of how things are.
So, I mean, I'm appreciating that particularly some listeners might be thinking, what's he talking about? What collapse? Which I mean, to you and me, who've been immersed with the literature, I've been seriously focusing on it for 3 years now, since I had a conversation in Glastonbury with someone, and we discussed about how we both thought we'd left it too late to avoid serious problems with things like climate breakdown, although that was the tip of the iceberg. Obviously, we don't really have the time or space to lay out the evidence. There's a lot on your website, isn't there, as well as the book. So if people want to go into the detail with that topic, they can.
Yeah, and so the first half of the book is pulling together all the data to make the case that modern industrial societies, the majority of modern industrial societies around the world, on all continents, are already breaking. The foundations are already cracking, and that's energy systems, food systems, the context, the biodiversity and habitats, stable climate. So I pull all the data together to explain that. And I argue that these things can't be fixed. So it's not like a crisis. It's not like a breakdown where you then reboot, get started again, patch things up, recover. And it's not like there's also a managed transition to a sustainable green future. Things are breaking and they're going to get a lot worse. So that's the first half of the book. And I'm not speculating. All I'm doing is extrapolating from existing trends. So because we live in a mediated environment where, whether we're following mainstream news or alternative news, there's an assumption of progress. And therefore, if there are problems, cost of living, increasing poverty, new diseases, there's someone or something to blame, a politician or an event or a bad decision or bad luck. But no, the data shows that in the majority of countries around the world, the standard of living and quality of life has been going down since 2016, and even in rich OECD countries since 2019. So this assumption of progress is redundant. The data shows that we are in a situation of regress. And if you're into statistics, 5 years in a row is a trend that, it's just not an anomaly. It's not a glitch or a blip. And because it's global, it's pointing to global causes. So whatever country we're in will naturally point to someone we don't like, or the media's told us who's in charge and they're wrong and they're the bad party or the bad leader, or it's a particular foreign enemy or whatever. But no, this is happening everywhere. So it's all lies. Everyone who's telling you that your life is becoming more shit because of Putin or Trump or whatever, they're just lying to you, because actually the data shows that it's happening everywhere because of the foundations of our way of life are crumbling.
Yes, I mean, again, I appreciate that for some listeners, that would be a lot to take in. And what I would say to that is, to anyone who's who's doubting what Jen's saying, go and do your own homework. I'll put some links in the show notes.
And there's no excuse now with chatbots. So I created GemBot, which runs off my book, but actually now, because my book is free as an EPUB, therefore it is accessible to ChatGPT and Claude and all the rest. And so you can just ask, what does Jem's book say about why we can't transition to net zero and feed 8 billion of us? Well, what's the argument there? And then it should be telling you, well, that's because of the dependence of our civilization on calories from grains, and how those grains, more than 60%, depend on artificial fertilizers made from so-called natural gas, fossilized gas. So, and then I guess because it will be drawing upon other information, it will present you the arguments against that, and you keep asking, and away you go. It's great. Use it while we've got it.
Absolutely. I mean, I think I get the sense that for you, but certainly for me also, this was one of the triggers behind writing the book that I eventually did write. This idea that we're facing sort of global systemic collapse. I think you actually say it's an indictment of a lot of the institutions that have got us there, and it also, for me, meant that I had to go back to basics and do a lot of foundational thinking, which included in places like philosophy and science. So do you think that's one reason why you felt there had to be a chapter on free will in the book?
So yeah, the first half of the book is saying, how bad it is, and it doesn't go into much detail about why. And the natural question is, well, when you talk to people about this, it's, so when is it going to fast forward from a general decline with sporadic disruptions and a general sense of anxiety, which is what a lot of people have got now, to when it will fast forward to there being no bread in the shops, or when? So the first question is like, when's that going to happen? And the second question is, who's to blame? That's always that, right? I think this is the and so we can reframe that slightly, which is how can we soften the collapse, and what made it happen, so we can learn, so we don't make it worse as we respond. So those two kind of natural questions can be reframed in something a little bit more deliberative and positive, which is what I try to do in my work on this topic. Yeah, and unless we dig into the systems that kind of cajoled us all into collectively destroying the biosphere, and are therefore destabilizing our societies. Unless we do that, you'll have opportunists coming along to say who we should blame. Or what I'm seeing is understandably frustrated, exasperated, scared environmentalists becoming a bit misanthropic, thinking, the human race is a cancer on the planet, we're a disease, we had it coming to us, we're a selfish species, we're not Homo sapiens, we're the dumbest species around. All that kind of depressive, despairing, self-loathing, and also not just self-loathing, it actually seems to be and when a lot of people say that, it's like, but because I can see that I'm somehow better, I'm kind of absolved from the sin of humanity because I can see how bad humanity is. So you've got that's happening. And I think that, that's based on fundamental, obvious misunderstandings. And I wanted to dive into that in the book to encourage more curiosity about how to reduce harm in this context, and what to do, what to learn from it. Bit more compassion, bit more innovation and creativity about how to respond in this time. Not just because we're not progressing anymore doesn't mean we can't help and come up with new ideas. So yeah, that was partly the motivation. And so then that led me into a deep dive into economics and capitalism and the monetary system in particular, the expansionist monetary system that is pretty much in every country around the world. And also it led me to look at the sort of like how that has put a certain way of being on steroids. So we could have had some modernity. We could have had some scientism. We could have had some patriarchy. It wouldn't necessarily have screwed everything up so badly, but with the expansionist monetary system, it really kind of favored certain ways of being and relating with each other and the planet, in which has led to this situation. So I looked at lots of things like the history of indigenous societies and ancient civilizations and the scholarship on those, and I also dived into the philosophy of free will, because in our panic, there are people sort of saying we just need some kind of strong leader to, like a tough father, to make us do what's good for us because our selfish and ill discipline led to this mess. That kind of framing that we've all received from patriarchal culture. So people, if they're not aware of that, that's just the culture speaking through them, and they don't think about it. If they don't actually think critically, well, which authoritarian country has been really good on the environment? If they don't inquire into it, then these unthinking responses will dominate. So that's why I explore it in the book. I want to offer a basis for a solidarity-based or a solidarity-driven politics for an era of collapse, because I don't think we have it yet. We have the right wing who are happy to talk about going back to the better things. So you put the clock back, make America great again, whatever the other phrases there are all around the world. Let's put the clock back. But then you've got the centrists, the progressivists, the liberals, the leftists. Generally, none of them are sort of accepting that things are going backwards and we can't. So they'll still like to pretend that if we just get the right people in power who make the tough decisions, the right ones for everybody, that somehow the ship is turned around. That's nonsense.
So I think there are a couple of things I'd like to pick up there. The first thing is, I was interested particularly because you've got a sociological background, and this feeds into your understanding of psychology. So a lot of psychology and cognitive science is still very individualistic, but one of the points you make is quite often the thoughts everyone thinks, are shaped and conditioned by the culture in which they live much more profoundly than we often realize. So I think this is one of the points, because I mean the chapter's in favor of free will and agency, but early on you say that a lot of the time we're actually not acting in as free a way as we could be, because we're just regurgitating what's been instilled into us by our upbringing, by our culture, by our experiences.
So I'm not entirely sure why I have such a non-negotiable commitment to personal and collective liberation. It's just in me. So I don't like seeing people being manipulated, and I've always been very curious about the way that happens, and the way you get people to, when they're having a tough time, punch down or punch each other rather than punch up, and how whichever institution it is, whether it's religious or governmental, a media company, or just global corporations and big tech now, there's always this, how do we just get the downtrodden masses to just hate each other rather than organize and get a better deal from us? So I've always been questioning about that. So I when I say I don't quite know why I have such a wish for co-liberation, it's in the realm of thinking that actually being alive is deeply ecstatic, and yet we live in a society and we live a daily life where it doesn't feel like that. And it's because we're weighed down by stories that we're unsafe, that we need to prove ourselves, that and we must behave, that we're inherently on some deep level bad unless we make an effort not to be bad, and all that sort of stuff. So I've got this inkling that actually life is ecstasy, and yet we're being oppressed by the bullshit narratives that we learn from birth, which are designed to control us, so, and serve power, maintain hierarchy. So I kind of, if you see that there's an ecstatic, natural way of being, then I think that that's why you get kind of annoyed and you at processes which stop people from approaching that in their own way. So then, then I look at the power of language and concept and culture, but I do it, in not to then say, oh my God, we're all just robots programmed by mass media messaging. No, it's just we are all susceptible to that. We're social beings. We are also genetically predisposed not to just know what the truth is, but actually to know what everyone else thinks and maintain a felt sense of belonging and acceptance from the others. That's, and if the thing is, if we don't recognize this stuff, then it's driving our bus, if we use the analogy of all the different sort of aspects of ourselves on the bus of ourselves. So that's, there we go. Whether it's psychology or sociology, let's actually look at those things which maybe, because we're not conscious of them, are driving us. But it's with the idea that we will allow ourselves to be more free, and make more conscious choices where we can explore what a choice means for ourselves and other people.
I resonate very strongly with what you said, particularly about life being basically ecstatic, because I think this is one reason why, if someone comes to me and says, life, the universe, and everything is pointless, it's all just fields and forces. Anything other than that is just an illusion. And the reason is, from early childhood, I think I've always been a sort of nature animist and mystic, even before I could speak. And Stephen Wright, who's a contemplative we were talking about before we started the interview, in an interview he did, which I'll link, he basically said that he had this same instinct, and it got, quotes, beaten out of him at school. And I was thinking exactly the same thing. What tends to happen, it's sort of the romantic thing, that we have, this very intimate and intense, mystical, if you like, relationship with the world. And it's like, Wordsworth says, basically, the shades of the prison house, descend as we go into adulthood. And I've always found it a shame that our culture seems to think that it has to beat it out of us. And I think that's one of the problems, actually, and why we're in such a mess ecologically.
Sure. If we feel inadequate and if we feel unsafe, we will compete more, we'll acquire more. And as we compete and acquire more, then there's a kind of a transactionality in the way we approach others and wider nature, the stuff we call the environment. And therefore, to cope with that, we have to numb our emotions about how we're living and the impact we're having in the world. So it's we're not new. This is not new commentary on the nature of being. It's ancient commentary on the nature of being. So that's important stuff to explore, and I suppose recognizing societal collapse is an opportunity, if we want to make it that, which is to look into these things. It absolutely, as you said, is an indictment of institutions using the broad sense of that word. So assumptions of right and wrong, of legitimate power, how to behave, or those sort of softer institutions, rather than just the institution of capitalism and parliament and government and the religions and the institution of banking and money.
Yeah. So, but I think one issue with approaching free will, and you do address this in your chapter, and I know we've been discussing further thoughts on the issue. You have to approach the free will debate in philosophy and science. So, for example, just in the last year or two, the biologist Robert Sapolsky has been doing the rounds with a new book called Determined, and he's what in the trade is known as a hardline determinist. He believes the universe is completely determined, and he believes that that makes free will impossible. And throughout his book, he actually presents quite a lengthy and thorough case for why free will is an illusion and that we are just completely determined by, a lot of the emphasis is on biological mechanisms and processes, but also obviously societal and cultural and the rest also feed into that. So I wondered, this is perhaps an entryway to those debates. I wonder what your thoughts on Sapolsky's work was and how it might contrast with your own.
Yeah, so he's helped create a wave of commentary in the media and online about the topic, and there's loads of TikTok and YouTubers out there presenting determinist views, so-called determinist views. So what I call them free will deniers. But yeah, it's a huge field for centuries, if not millennia. So it's a massive thing to get into. The first thing in any such conversation is to be clear on definitions. So for me, I'm interested in relative free will because I can see that for me the self-evident truth is that all of reality is more than just connected. It's interextant. It's in total relationship at all times. And when I see that, that doesn't mean that therefore I think it's one machine with kind of like someone having pulled the lever at the time of the Big Bang. And so it's a choice to apply a model of a almost like a dead machine to the the totality of the interrelated universe. It's a choice that comes from the culture that we exist in. It's absolutely not an objective truth or self-evident that everything exists now is caused by a prior factor in a determined and a predetermined way. Yes, a lot of our feelings, thoughts, and actions are shaped, influenced by either internal or external forces. But to jump from sort of knowing that your DNA, your social upbringing, what you had for breakfast in the morning, to jump from knowing that influences whether you or I are talking or whether whoever's listening is listening, to jump from that to then say, well, there's absolutely no free will, there's no possibility of volition of any organism. I think it's kind of like discovering that various aspects of music can be analyzed and explained mathematically, to then say that there's nothing other than mathematics to music, nothing at all. And I think this is kind of like just reflective of how people they like to remove ambiguity, partly because there's the idea that if you remove ambiguity, you feel safer because you feel like your model is correct and it's certain, irrefutable. And so I actually see the desire for these simplistic explanations as maybe being a little bit awkward about the messiness of life. And actually a scientific approach, it's quite funny really, because a scientific approach is not determinist. A scientific approach is agnostic on this matter and uses scientific method to explore and to test a theory. So determinism is just it's a meta theory that everything is mechanistic and therefore predetermined. And you can then test it, because science is based on testability, repeatability, and the possibility of falsifying your theory. It's not based on assumption of determinism. And yet, because so many scientists think that determinism is central to science, they think that people who question that and who actually say, no, we can't explain everything about organisms from biological mechanics, they therefore think we're being unscientific. Well, that's just bullshit. It's just completely wrong. It's just a reflection of an outmoded notion of scientism, which assumes determinism. And the new biology, you mentioned Sapolsky as a biologist, I mean, the new biology is showing us that so much of the confidence of the past about how every organism's behavior and evolution itself can be easily explained through mechanics of, for example, DNA mutations and natural selection. The new biology is showing that's not the case. Organisms are involved in the evolutionary process, even at the level of a single cell. Like, we now know bacteria aren't just randomly mutating their genome and then natural selection pressures mean that then they're the ones that survive. No, bacteria actually actively change their own genome in response to external conditions. The mechanisms in the cell are beginning to be looked at, but we don't know about the initiation of that. And so the word that biologists that work on this have come up with to describe it is some kind of proto-agency. But we don't know what's driving that. And the assumption of determinism is we will always find out. We will always find a new cog in the machine or a new belt connecting the cogs. It's all there to be found. But that is an ideological standpoint. It's a useful one. It drives experimental methods, and so it's useful. But it's still an ideological viewpoint. It's still to make it a claim about whole of the universe so that it's always and only predetermined, it's not a scientific stance at all. And therefore, we need to retain the space for talking about free will as actually something which is not unscientific. And if, therefore, natural scientific method can't conclude this debate, then why restrict ourselves to the natural sciences and related things like neuroscience? Why? That's just a reflection on our culture, where there are various other ways that we humans know the world. So, you and I experience life where we feel like we have free will, and billions of other people report that. That's data in itself, isn't it? And that there's a whole field, it's phenomenology, where if you just say, okay, if this is how things are being reported as experienced, you then examine that. And then we can have very interesting discussions about, well, what is going on here? What is the nature of free will? What does it mean? Is there dualism there then between matter and energy on the one hand and some other thing which we might call soul, spirit, or whatever? But we don't have to. We can stay agnostic on that and explore it.
Yes. Again, I think this debate actually goes right to the heart of debates on consciousness and the nature of reality, which it's part of the raison d'etre for this show, actually. But one thing I noticed, sort of reviewing Sapolsky's arguments, was that they're very similar to arguments I see trotted out over and over again, sort of in the literature. So, for example, about 20 years ago, a psychologist, Daniel Wegner, wrote a book called The Illusion of Conscious Will, and he started off by invoking the 18th century mathematician Simon Pierre Laplace's demon, which is the idea that, essentially that if you knew, I think it's the position of each molecule in the universe, you had enough information, you could predict the entire past and future of the universe. So that's a strongly deterministic position. And it was right at the beginning of Wegner's book 20 years ago. And then I read exactly the same argument again in Robert Sapolsky. But what surprised me was he doesn't seem to realize that that's a foundational assumption that may or may not be true. He just basically takes strong determinism for granted, and I think this is a cultural thing within the sciences that he works. Because I mean, I did a PhD in sort of basically animal behavior, and it always struck me as being a very mechanistic discipline. I think that had a history that basically in the 19th century, people like Charles Darwin would openly talking about the consciousness of animals. Early 20th century, you get behaviorism coming in. People like Thorpe saying you shouldn't assume it's anything except for mechanism. And so, although people are talking about consciousness now, it's always in a very mechanistic frame. And that determinism, I think, comes along with that, you know?
Sure. And what's interesting is you can even retain a mechanistic view and say, well, maybe there's a consciousness field that the bacteria is connected to, and that's what's driving the editing of the genome. Maybe the consciousness is not in the bacteria, but you could still maintain the mechanistic thing. Just because we know that gravity exists and there are electromagnetic fields, and so it doesn't sort of it fits. So maybe there is an universal information field, and a patch of that field is the bacteria field, and that's what's going on there. So it's kind of odd that there's just so much dogma and lack of curiosity, and supposedly the professions that are meant to be actually paid to be curious. But also, you could even say, okay, the universe is like a massive clock; it's clockwork. But we also know that there are always emergent properties of complex systems, and so consciousness, as we're experiencing it, and other organisms are experiencing it, is an emergent property. You could even say that, and not say that it's an illusion, not say that it's entirely predetermined. It's an emergent property which has awareness and can make choices, which can't be predetermined. So you could, if you wanted to, even retain the mechanistic view. So it's almost what I'm saying is that there are choices at decision points to try and reinforce the idea that it's all just everything is basically like the machines and the toys and the computer code that we've made. So basically, we refuse to see technology as coming out of nature. No, the things we've made that we enjoy playing with all the time, this is actually how the rest of the world truly is. So I think of it like a toddler on a beach made a sandcastle, and then suddenly, well, clearly the beach is made of sandcastles or components of sandcastles and nothing else. It's that kind of peculiar logic.
Yes, I like that. And the thing is, reading reading a book like Sapolsky, because I don't want to single him out because he's really reflecting the views of quite a few biologists and neuroscientists even now, I think, but by no means all. That's an important caveat, I think. I find it striking how unconscious a lot of these assumptions actually are. And the thing is, superficially, you can make quite strong cases that will is an illusion if you stick and accept those assumptions without question. And I think it's very culturally widespread because the number of sort of educated, intelligent people that I've spoken to who just take it for granted that free will is an illusion. Oh yes, it's an illusion. It was all proved just for granted, without even thinking about it.
Yes,
Um,
I've met such people as well. In fact, it's kind of the hip thing to say in passing now. Oh yeah, science, free will, illusion. Yeah, it's kind of and then the next breath they'll say, but hey, if you change your attitude about something, then you can manifest whatever you want in the world. How do those two things, totally diametrically opposed, are hip things to say by people who don't really think very much, but they like to say whatever's hip?
Yeah, absolutely, and quite often the experiments of Benjamin Libet and more latterly,
Oh yeah,
John
always, isn't it? Always.
this is always.
Always. So we should say that, shouldn't we? We should explain that then, because you and I know
We should.
about it, but many other people don't. So was it in 1989 it was done? So Benjamin Libet did a test where he got people to decide when to move the wrist or the finger and watch a clock and memorize the time when they made the choice to move the wrist or the finger. And then he had measurement devices for the brain for when the signal was sent, and claimed therefore that the signal was sent to the hand before the hand moved, and therefore everything is predetermined since the Big Bang. End of story. Oh yeah, right. So there's so many problems with it. Um, uh, for example, the brain is constantly paying attention to our bodies, including our hands, all the time. So there's aspects of brain activity checking how is the body, and then if you're thinking about moving your finger, well, beforehand it's a subconscious process of the brain checking that the hand is there, it's in position, and that it's in working order. So that happens. So, and then the whole process of being the secondary process, which is not just move the finger. And again, are they going to do it spontaneously or not? How spontaneous? If you're a musician, if you're a tennis player, well, like, do you know what I mean? It's like there are so many things going on there, which will affect how spontaneously you do it or whatever. But yeah, you've got to be thinking, okay, I better be paying attention to the clock now. Oh, I'm about to move my finger, so again, very subtly, subconsciously, better pay closer attention to the clock and what the time's going to be. Now I move my finger. So it's really quite ridiculous. And subsequent tests, like as Haynes and others, they don't resolve these problems. It's just the same problems again and again and again. And in fact, the new ones like Haynes, they introduce new problems. In his case, the participants in the study, every half a second, they're seeing a new letter of the alphabet, and then they need to memorize the letter they saw at the moment that they chose to move their left or right hand. But that's stimuli. Like, if you see the letter A, if I see the letter A, that'll create a much bigger emphasis on me than if I see the letter G. Perhaps, although now I'm a musician, maybe I play the chord G more. Or if I see an F, and I was scared of getting an F at school. Do you know, all these things are, and guess what? Those sorts of higher level thoughts actually occur in the same part of the brain as the choice to move the hand. So now for me, these studies are pure junk, and the fact that they are elevated to be considered as knowledge, to discuss free will, is an indicator of a kind of like a regression, of a degradation, a breaking down of the quality of intellectual discourse.
Yeah.
Because as a direct result of the dominance of what's called scientism in society, so that you think that, well, if someone's got some electrical powered machines and sensors and whatever, and they can talk in equations, then okay, their ideas on the world are far superior to yours or mine, and it's just nonsense. It's kind of fun for a critical person like me to look at this and say, God, this is junk. But no, I mean, I'm sent TikTok videos. I was sent a TikTok video by a friend when he knew I was thinking about these things. Was it your friendly neighborhood neuroscientist who's maybe not even finished her degree, who's telling us that free will doesn't exist because Libet proved it doesn't exist. And she's got like 2 million views for that video. Probably more than what you'll get for this podcast.
Oh, well, yes, massively more, but I'm working on it. But yes, I'm afraid massively more. I think it's the unreflexive nature of a lot of this work, and it actually bothers me more and more. The kinds of experiments neuroscience does, animal behavior research does. What worries me is that a lot of these experiments seem set up to strip out any form of intentionality or purpose from the action and just look at the mechanical bits. And I often wonder whether that's not a fundamental mistake, particularly when you're dealing with consciousness. And I think it goes beyond the free will debates, actually. When I read about experiments at the moment trying to prove or disprove or provide evidence for various very quite mechanistic neuroscience theories of consciousness, I think the same thing, that the subjective experience, in a word, gets stripped out or treated as secondary, and all you're left with is mechanical actions. And I think there's a big mistake being made there. I struggle to put my finger on it exactly, but I think there's a mistake there.
Sure, and on some level, it seems a bit weird to me that a neuroscientist will be interested in the utterance of a human being once they've turned them into effectively a robot to look at a clock and move their finger, but they won't want to listen to the utterances of 8 billion people who say, I believe I experience freedom of choice to a degree, to some degree. Like, it is actually kind of, you could say it's a form of madness. That we've created systems of knowledge that are so alienating, that so desperately need to be reductionist and determinist and incremental from past reductionism and determinism based conclusions. So yeah, it's but you're also pointing to something else, which is, and why this matters to me, it's the in two ways. One is the whole culture of scientism is connected to the desacralization of nature and of ourselves. It's the demystifying of nature and ourselves to remove the sense of wonder and possibly ecstasy from being alive. It kind of just let's just see everything as a dead machine that's just like purely providing an appearance or an illusion of something more than effectively a wet machine. So yeah, it's part of that. And that way of looking at each other and the world is necessary for genocide, ecocide, omnicide. We humans could not cope with the amount of destruction that we witness or are part of if we didn't have these stories that kind of remove the sacredness and full aliveness of each other and other beings. So that's why I
Yes.
can't resist it as well in my book. It's part of that. Oh, yeah, we've got to be careful that scientism, I wouldn't even just say scientism. I mean, determinism is not necessary for the science. It's not part of the scientific method. It's just not. So it's kind of like an anachronistic element of scientism. But yeah, there's a good question to be asked. I haven't looked into it. To what extent has free will denialism taken off in the last few years? And to what extent can that be related back to the interests of hierarchies, powers, elites, or capital? I don't know. But what I do know is that there's a lot of sociology and social psychology on how elites, privileged people, people in power, like theories that help them feel better about their privilege and the power and the consequences of their actions for everybody else. And there are a whole bunch of different social theories about that. And so they absolutely will like a theory which says, oh, well, don't bother yourself with any sort of existential guilt about what's going on in order to maintain your power. Don't worry about whether there's any moral murkiness about you deciding how you should fix the planet according to your ideas. You see, it takes that away. It's like, well, just objectively decide what's good for the world. And if you're going to, you just happen to have been given loads of power. And so you're just applying your ideas without, there's no free will there. So don't worry yourself about these sort of moral dilemmas. yeah, so this could be a free will denialism could be the evil twin of long-termism in the pseudo philosophies of billionaires, and it could have been already, and could be encouraging them to do horrific stuff which doesn't help humanity, but because they just think, well, it doesn't matter because, yeah, what matters is their vision of what the future should be.
Yes, it's very weird because I sense a lot of fatalism in our culture, not just not just sort of the 99%, but also amongst the people who are supposed to have all the wealth and power. There's a very strange kind of fatalism. I mean, I'm thinking of Douglas Rushkoff's. Well, it was an article and then a book about a strange meeting he had with. I I think it was advisors. It was a financial people or something. He's basically got jetted out to a desert, and then they started asking questions about the future, and then it became obvious that they were asking questions about what they would do when the event, the collapse happened, and they were all in bunkers, and whether their security guards would need collars, and I sense the same fatalism weirdly, even with people like Elon Musk, who that they're always saying, "I want to save or shape the world in their image," but there's at the same time this very fatalistic attitude, and Ruskos actually links hardline materialism with what he calls a mindset, which is a Silicon Valley sort of extractive attitude that basically everything is data. People are manipulable machines. It's all about control and manipulation. And for me, the free will denial goes very much hand in hand with that.
Yeah, I'll have to look at that again to see the extent to which free will denialism is part of the intellectual foundation of the tech bros, who obviously have massive power and will have even more power in the years to come, because I share Yanis Varoufakis's view that techno-feudalism is a useful way of talking about the global economic scene now, because of the digital space is so crucial to politics and markets and everything. So and it's so monopolized, and how we can be so easily manipulated. In fact, we are, by what we see is edited and is curated for us, and it's showing us what an impression of what our peers think, but that's not it. They're choosing what we see of what our peers think. So it's creating artificial stories of what the thing is to belong to. So we see that over the last few years. Yeah, people worry about expressing a view which they think is contrary to the moral norm, but that moral norm is being curated for us by for-profit corporations. So yeah, it's kind of a dystopian situation we have now because of that. But yeah, I'd be interested to know what they think about free will.
It's sort of curated realities, I think. But
Hmm.
yeah, curated realities is probably the word. But I think this is the price for taking a very controlling and manipulative approach to the world, that you end up being quite a mechanistic thinker, I think. So maybe that's a cost that hasn't been recognized.
Yeah, the thing is that all those kind of weird geeky people in class when we're at school, they're the ones who rule the world now, and maybe there's some problems with that.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I do
Yeah.
think, though, that all this talk of the problem of scientism, the weaknesses of determinism, and why is it so popular, and how has it undermined a full experience of life and our normal empathy and compassion for unnecessary suffering to others and to nature, or wider nature. All of that is important, but at the same time, it means we're talking about that, not talking about amazing wisdom traditions about the nature of consciousness and the existence of free will and what is it that has the will. Yeah, all of that. So it's almost like to engage in the stuff we talked about is almost like a form of penance. Stop.
Yes.
Rather than
Yeah, very much. So that was actually my next question, because in your book, we talk about the failures of this, but you're absolutely right. You also discuss spiritual perspectives on free will, and I was particularly interested to ask about that, because that seems to me to lead to, we could call it post-materialist views on consciousness, but actually that's perhaps culturally biased in itself, because these views have been around in the wisdom traditions, have been around for thousands of years. So I was very interested to read your writing in the book, but also elsewhere, on Eastern Vedic Buddhist philosophies and their approaches.
Yeah, absolutely. Buddhism, the more I learn about it, the more I'm astounded that it explains everything probably perfectly. and and also what's interesting is it's telling me what I kind of already knew, but I had my own language for, or I didn't have language for, but I felt like I already knew it. I wonder then, would it have been better to have, I'm 52, would it have been better to have discovered Buddhism much earlier in my life properly, and maybe, or maybe it just wouldn't have resonated in the way it does now. But yeah, on the nature of free will, the nature of consciousness, it's basically my view. My view is the Buddhist view now, and now that I have learned the Buddhist view, that is the view I had, which is that there's an aspect of myself. There's an aspect of myself which is the relational, comprised self of biology and nurture and environment and culture, and it's the thing that I call Jem, and that I kind of feel has some sort of coherence, and probably deep down then I'm scared. It's the ego, it's scared about maintaining that coherence and defending that thing, including the physical body, but the way this persona shows up in the world and is liked or otherwise by others. So that's a composite self, but of course it's nothing in the life of planet Earth or the universe, or in the geography of the universe. And it also doesn't feel the entirety of me. So there's something else. Some people call it soul, spirit. For me, it's, yeah, I mentioned it earlier. There's a universal field of consciousness, and within which there's a pattern which produces me, and which I leave an imprint on, and which existed prior to me and now to as I am and after this body is gone. And the words I've just used to describe it are inevitably rubbish. This is an aspect of reality that is transcending separation, and therefore transcending categorization, transcending the ways we talk about object, subject, verb, etc. It just so we can't approach it through concept and language. So it's a thing that we experience, and I've been lucky to have had some non-ordinary experiences of consciousness, which have meant that I've realized that consciousness is just not just within not just within my brain or my body. And yeah, so that's helped me also sense that there's this other aspect of reality. And of course, so many spiritual traditions and religions point towards that. Now, the way they point to it, the tools of pointing, the Quran, the Bible, the Upanishads, whatever, the tools are faulty. Absolutely. They're inescapably faulty. as I talk about in the book, they are effing the ineffable. But the thing they're pointing to is there, and I feel on some level calmed by that knowing. Like I'm relieved by that knowing, and it's nice to remind myself and other people of that.
Yes, I think you're touching again on a very central theme here. Well, with transpersonal psychology, parapsychology, a lot of these disciplines that have basically been again marginalized in our culture, and particularly when I talk to indigenous scholars about this too. So I think I'm increasingly conscious that marginalization has been quite deliberate. And again, I think it feeds into this idea that we're these atomized individuals within, sort of a Hobbesian system, if you like. But Buddhism, yes, absolutely. The writing there is so resonant with human experience, particularly when you start meditating seriously. And one of the things I like about your writing, on your website, you occasionally put reports on your contemplative practice about the insights that you find. So I'm wholly sympathetic to this idea. I mean, I think in terms of the different religions, there are different takes for me on what you're saying. This sort of common reality, and there's a whole argument over perennial philosophies and everything there. But I think basically, when you read mystical writings in whichever culture, there's so much commonality there, and then you feed it back to your experience.
Yes, I probably mentioned the not the best texts for the mystical. Yeah. And that's because institutions, hierarchies, systems of power get involved in religions. Yeah, I what shall I say to what you said? There may be some people thinking, and so what? What does this matter? Okay, so there's free will, or at least free will can't be disproven by natural science, and determinism is disproven by natural science, I would say. And I will share more on that. I talk about it a bit in the book, but I'll probably share more on that in future writing. But so then we're left with looking at free will and consciousness in ways broader than natural science and neuroscience. And yeah, but why does it matter? For me, I think we live in a death-phobic culture, and so it's important. What one of the weird benefits of becoming aware of societal breakdown and collapse, which can't be reversed, one of the weird benefits of that is the shock and the grief, and it brings a sense of mortality of us and those we love and anyone who's familiar to us, and not just that, but just culture. It brings the death of all of that into our reality. It's not just somewhere off in the distance. It brings it something we need to look at and feel into now. And so that can be a doorway to a spiritual awakening for some people. And I think that's valuable in and of itself. A spiritual awakening means that people can experience the ecstasy of being alive before they die. And hopefully they can also then be kinder to themselves, to each other, and to wider nature in the rest of their lives. They can also less likely to behave like the robots that Silicon Valley want us to be. And yeah, I've got a feeling, and I can't really explain it, that it's somehow right that we awaken to our metaphysical, spiritual, whatever we want to call it, selves. Yeah. So that's why it matters. Also, possibly because, I'm not sure, but there might be some kind of philosophical brainwashing project underway in order to justify greater authoritarianism. So if we just get the public thinking, well, there was no free will anyway, then stop worrying about your rights and all this and what you might have preferred. Just focus on the fact that you are able to feed yourself and enjoy yourself watching TV.
Yes, I would say it's actually foundationally important, because if what we're saying is true, there's this transpersonal dimension to consciousness, and there's this underlying ground. It means that our culture, particular culture, has got it totally wrong on so many different levels, and this wrongness has led to, you know, materialistic acquisition, greed, the banking system you were talking about, because it's one of the puzzles I was thinking about, because I was actually reading I think it's Stephen James Bartlett. He wrote a massive book on evil, and it takes a very negative view of so-called human nature. But again, he does it from a very materialistic viewpoint, and he's very critical of what he calls the transcendental illusion. But again, this extremely negative view of human nature. Oh, we're like a virus on the planet. Evil's like a virus. We're so destructive. Stupidity's rampant. But I was reading through this and then thinking about what you've written about how this is. You can make quite a strong case. This is culturally specific. So I think actually these foundational questions, like we started with, really, for me, are crucially important at this time.
Sure. There'll be many more people arguing that we're awful, and they have to ignore tens of thousands of years of harmonious human existence on planet Earth, and the evidence that actually humans have cultivated the Amazon for it to be the biodiverse landscape it is today. And it is a racist act to ignore that. It's like we'll just define all humanity as what we are today now, with this imperial modernity and hypercapitalism and expansionist monetary systems and these post-colonial or neo-colonial systems that were created mainly by Europeans. We'll just say that that's it. That is the definition of the human story on life on Earth. We'll just choose to be blind to other ways of living, which were the dominant ways of living, including even in Europe prior to the Industrial Revolution. And so, yeah, it's there'll be lots more of that. People are intuiting calamity, and that's also why people are vulnerable to various stories of what's going wrong. I call it collapsis, which is this sort of disease or psychosis. You're just believing whatever you're told about what's wrong. So, oh, there's not enough babies being born, so society's going to collapse. Well, people are even people who are environmentalists now telling me that and saying, well, how quickly? Well, let's take South Korea. It's got the lowest birth rate in the world. Like, if that doesn't change, when does South Korea collapse? It's like, well, uh, I showed even if it had a zero birth rate in 20 years, the population would only be about 10%, 15% less. So you got, yeah, it's just so many people are just inventing loads of nonsense and then making it popular through various media. And it's because people, they intuit calamity. They feel that because we have animal bodies, we have subconscious processing, which we call intuition. So people know that things are wrong. People, even extreme climate change deniers, have experienced, if they're older than 20 years old, they have experienced the climate getting a bit strange in the last 10 years. So they do step outside and they do feel that, and their bodies will know that. So on some subconscious level, they're a bit anxious, even if they're telling themselves stories based on what they're being told on the media.
I mean, I do think that the situation we're in does seem to be a bit like that Netflix movie, Don't Stop, where every story is being trotted out except the actually salient. Yeah, in my darker moments, I sort of I think this is almost funny if it wasn't so, you
Oh,
know.
it's interesting you talk about darker moments. So the big thing I've had to come to terms with is that not only are we defeated in terms of a managed transition to a sustainable, beautiful way of life, there's going to be a hell of a lot of suffering, and we don't quite know how many of us and what kind of society gets through this disaster, global disaster that's already beginning.
Yeah,
So, but then deciding to still show up with my full self, curious and wanting to help. That's the challenge. But then the new thing I've had to accept is that the conversation we're having now doesn't really matter much at scale. Any work that you do, even if you did get 10 million listens for this podcast, we we we're swimming against the tide of global corporations and capital, which is going to promote the stories that keep us punching each other or punching people below us and keep us from actually looking at the reality of what's going wrong and why and
yeah,
how to begin to change it. So I think it won't work. The stuff we're talking about will not become widespread enough to achieve very much at scale. And yet, it's still worth doing.
yes,
So that's difficult, but it's difficult. So I know that conceptually, and at moments where I'm feeling a little bit spiritually awakened, that's real. That I feel that. Like there's a power, a need, a truth, and a beauty in just exploring and communicating, even if in the hope of liberating minds and being liberated myself through conversation, even if it just doesn't work very much.
a few is better than none. But also, on your Buddha at the gas pump interview, I remembered that you were very critical of perhaps what's been called the conscious evolution idea, that this global crisis will trigger some great awakening. And I think you outlined some quite plausible reasons to be skeptical of that particular idea.
Well, those ideas generally come from older white men writing books like me. They're like, oh yeah, we're gonna have a mass spiritual awakening, consciousness shift, and so it's anthropocentric, it's progressivist, so and it's kind of ridiculous because like I think yeah, in that interview I talked about the people who work with me on my farm who are Balinese, and their life revolves around the temple and their biodynamic calendar and sorry, so they need to become aware of global crisis. They need to somehow decide that there's a planetary attitude that they need to have, and then do you know what I mean? Like what? I mean, no, it- I don't get that at all. It's the kind of story that comes from uh, urban, modern, educated people who feel bereft of sort of um beautiful spiritual belonging in their own place. I think so. Yeah, I
Yes,
said something like that, didn't I? I th-
you did, and I think it resonated because I was trying to write a chapter on what I thought these sort of capacities, the contemplative transpersonal dimension could lend to the future, and it made me realize that however you conceptualize that, you've got to do it realistically, which means acknowledging the sort of dimensions that you're talking about. That maybe will always be a minority interest. We are swimming against the tide of massive wealth and power. But then one thing Stephen Wright mentioned, he was talking about burnout, and how what happens in burnout, he thinks there's a spiritual dimension. This is sort of personal burnout. So say a health worker can't work anymore, and they experience not just
Can I pause you there and we'll come back to
yes, of
burnout?
course,
Just with what
yes,
you
of
just
course.
I'm gonna say that what I'm noticing in the storytelling around some kind of global consciousness shift is a desire for a story of purpose, therefore a desire for a story of some kind of achievement. So it's it goes against the idea that everything's fine on some deep level, including whenever the human race goes extinct. That's all fine. So it takes us away from that full acceptance of life. The universe needs to be better. And if we're talking about ancient wisdom, then for me the best book is the Tao Te Ching, Lao Tzu, and there's a nice, he questions the reader. Sorry, do you think you can make the world better? It's like, ha ha ha. No, do you think you can make the world better? Ha ha. And so, so yeah, there's that subtle alienation from life as we find it in even that idea of achieving some sort of consciousness awakening. And we've got to be careful with that. Therefore, and therefore, when I hear people talk like that, I say, look, we don't know. Maybe in the grander scheme of planetary planetary consciousness, universal consciousness, and the unfolding of things, the human race had a role which was to make the planet more toxic and more radioactive so that it would speed up the evolution of the cockroach to become this supremely powerful being that would then bring its consciousness to the solar system. Maybe. We don't know.
Well, we really don't, do we? I mean,
No.
again, it is this anthropocentrism, which I think is such a massive problem. It's such a massive problem culturally speaking
Yeah.
that we got.
Anyway, you're talking about burnout. If you want to switch.
Yes, well, it's related because you were wondering what the use of all of this is, and I think one of the things that struck me when Stephen Wright was talking about burnout was he was saying that one thing that happens with people when they're suffering from that is, first of all, it's a crisis of meaning, but it's also because they've been running things on their own, perhaps egocentric batteries so much, and quite often he thinks the way to recovery is via a process of spiritual inquiry and opening up to those transpersonal aspects of people. So my thought was that we've got this dreadful unfolding long-term event we can call collapse unfolding around us, but we've built a culture that has isolated people from those capacities that they have within them, or in a very individualistic way. And at the very least, we might not be able to, you're absolutely right, make it a minority pastime. But if we could at least point the way to more people being able to access those capacities, it might simply help them to cope better with what's sort of coming down the line. I don't know what you thought about that. So they're not running on their own batteries is the point I think he was trying to make.
Yeah. I'm I'm not an expert in burnout, other than thinking maybe I burned out twice in my life, but anything Stephen Wright says sounds good to me. So, and the Reverend of the Lakes and the Mystic of the Lakes, yeah. I do you know what? I don't know whether maybe ignorance is bliss. Maybe maybe people believing that Elon Musk is their savior is a happier way for people to live until it isn't. So like, but yeah, I don't know now. For me, I come back to the why does it matter? there is an ecstasy of being alive that we could access, and more of us could access, and that involves or includes a freedom from cultural pressures and stories and so on, which diminish us, diminish our creativity, diminish our ability to fully appreciate life. So, yeah, if people are ready for that, it's good. But a lot of people aren't, and so I'm also of the opinion that, well, maybe I should get a little bit better at feeling okay about leaving them be with their what I consider to be delusional stories that there's too many immigrants and etc. Whatever the popular thing to be bothered about today is that they're being told that they must be bothered about, which will never be the bankers, which will never be exploitative systems of money and power. It will be whatever. Maybe just leave them be. So a part of me, I'm not sure. Part of me is like, okay, try and invite people to awareness of collapse and a potential spiritual awakening. And part of me, maybe the burned out part of me, feels, oh, maybe just leave everyone to it and I'll just go off and sing a song.
Absolutely. But I think that's what it's about. For me, if only one or two people hears what you're saying, that's surely got, I don't know, maybe that makes a difference in the cosmic scheme of things. But as you also say in your writings, we don't know. It's like you were talking about death and about how we don't know what's beyond death. I had an interview recently on near-death experiences, and I've sort of been interested in that sort of thing for a very long time. But if you were to really press me, I don't know. I don't know what happens beyond, but I don't know. I think it is true that crisis does invite those deep questions for a lot
But
of
it's
people.
really good that you don't know, Matt. It's what I discovered I wrote about that as well. I was like, what exquisite design of the human experience that if we truly want to know, we end up not knowing at the moment of our last breath. It's only if we want to con ourselves to somehow feel okay about death that we'll think we know. But if we truly want to know, we die without knowing. And that is the invitation to ultimate ego transcendence, the not knowing of the most important thing, life and death. That our stories, our maps, our philosophies of reality they're just fictions that we just don't know. So it's brilliant. I used to think I really must make sure that I know I'm busy being useful for the environment, and I want to make sure I have more fun with women than I have before. What are those stories in my life? And get better at tennis. I want to be able to serve properly again. All that. But I must remember to work out what I believe is going to happen when I die and what the experience will be. And then I realized, finally, after meditating and being in a Buddhist temple on the island that I go to here offline for a few days, it just came to me. It's perfect that I just won't know. And I hope that I'm able, when I'm dying, to almost relish the fact, don't know, it's and
It,
be kind of relaxed about it. So relish. So say, oh wow, okay, here goes. But we'll see.
well, it's about surrender. I think Gwyneth Lewis, the poet, in her book Sunbathing in the Rain, which is a memoir of depression, actually, she says that when our final breath comes, whatever conceptual scheme we have, scaffold, will be left behind as we have a vertiginous climb to infinity. And I thought that's absolutely right. It's just going to be left behind for the sort of slightly feeble structure that it always was. But okay, so I guess we're coming to the end, and I know that you're you're not planning to write any books, and that you're also retiring from teaching the Leadership Through Collapse course. So, what are you going to be doing from here on in? And do you have any ambitions or plans?
Sort of. I'm running. Well, no, I kind of. Yeah, I'm running a loss-making organic farm and farm school, which we need to find a better situation for. Otherwise, I need to shut it down or sell it. So that's one of the things on my plate. Aside from that, yeah, I'm giving myself a year to get much more into music. So I write songs, I release songs, I play in a kirtan band, so that's devotional music. I play in a cacao ceremony band, so that's also devotional music. And I'm going to be doing so, but I'm quite basic in my musical skills. So I'm prioritizing getting better as a musician, and I probably will release a few more songs maybe later in the year. They are all going to be sort of things that approach the kind of stuff we've talked about. My songs approach these topics in different ways. And yeah, I I do relish exploring philosophical ideas, and so I'm going to treat myself as well this year to do more things like reading into free will, and I will be sharing ideas on that and other things once or twice a month on my blog for the rest of the year. But it's I'm giving myself some space. Also, I co-run meditation retreats, but that's mainly for friends or friends of friends, and it's not an income, it's just for fun. So I'm giving myself a year. Music, philosophy, and the farm, and also just to maybe relax a bit more and get a bit fitter, because I kind of ruined my body working so hard on the book. It was like a lot of work. And also maybe changed my psychology. I became more of a hermit. Well, someone called me the other day a hermit heretic. Like became a bit like that. And I'm wanting to just be gentle with myself, but become a bit more sociable again and do stuff. So I've hired my own personal yoga instructor, which is a massive extravagance. I would never consider doing something like that. But that's to help me get back in touch with my body and actually have a joy about it. Because if I went to a yoga studio, that's a pain in the ass, and I'm comparing myself subconsciously to everyone else and how rubbish I am, and I got to keep up. So I thought, okay, self-acceptance. I need my own personal tutor to get myself back into this. So I'm at that place. And then we'll see, because next year, 2026, I'll have to start earning money again. So I don't know quite how that's going to work. So we'll see.
Yeah, it's always a work in, well, literally a work in progress, isn't it?
Mm.
That sounds a very healthy place to be, actually, because I think, just to finish off, I think one of the things that I resonate with it as well. Actually, it's one of the reasons why I mentioned to you that I'm sort of going off to retreat in April. Is exactly this. I feel in some ways profoundly tired with having to engage with our culture in a lot of ways, quite honestly, and trying to seek another way of being that's just very. And again, the simplicity I think is very important. Getting back to what's important to you, rather than just having to chase after the next crisis and disaster, which is exhausting, And I think quality of life is so important, isn't it?
Well, yeah, and I did after the book came out. I spent a year and a half quite actively promoting it, or because I recognized that it's not a big publisher and mass media don't want to talk about this. So unless I do some work to promote it, I will feel like of yeah. Even though I'm not. Well, actually, I was in that 18 months. I was operating from a story of impact and scale, and thinking I need to have some impact. I need to have some scale of impact to feel that those 2.5 years of my life weren't like spent in vain. But yeah, I'm not really operating from that story anymore. But yeah, yeah, I'm I'm really happy that I've created this time, and it feels right. In my past, I would have felt this as being selfish and hedonistic, but I'm helping some people with organic farm schooling, and I'm helping the people who show up at my kirtans and cacao ceremonies, and I'm hopefully helping some people who read my articles and blogs. And yeah, I'm going to give one speech this year in Stroud about the importance of community exchange systems to create community resilience as things break down. So that's the one sort of public thing I'm going to do, because I'm really going to try and. Oh, apart from this is kind of public, isn't it?
Yeah, I hope so. It would be nice, actually.
In person, but this is it actually. Apart from this will be no more podcasts. I've said no to everything, but yeah, gonna hide. Gonna be doing other things.
Yes, I think that's great. But I'm very glad that I
Something
got
on
you
music.
before you.
Yeah.
I'm glad I got you before you retired. Anyway,
Yeah.
so
Well, check out my music. It's the Barefoot Stars. So that's on Spotify and on YouTube. My YouTube channel is Jem Bendell, and I'll probably release a few things related to the topics we've covered in the next year. So there will be bits and pieces coming from me, just not as much as before, and we'll see what comes next.
great, and I can highly recommend Breaking Together too. I'll warn people it is a heavy read, but I think when I had that conversation back in 2022, I started getting very annoyed by everything being sugar-coated by people, and you and I think Rupert Reed were about and a couple other people, Joanna Macy, were about the only people that I thought were actually being honest. So I think if for no other reason, then it was massively worth you writing that book. Anyway, many thanks, Jem, and I wish you well for your future activities, and I'll post links to your website and everything else on the show notes. So thank you very much.
Okay, great, Matt. Thanks for the chat.
What Lies Beyond with your host, Matt Coburn. Conversations on consciousness science, the paranormal, and the post-material future. This podcast accompanies the What Lies Beyond book by Matt Coburn, now available for purchase on Amazon and other retail outlets. Visit us and subscribe on whatliesbeyond.substack.com.